Here this afternoon and welcome you, and let's remember the midweek service at 7 o'clock Wednesday night, and also continue to remember our services on Sunday mornings at 9:30 Bible class and worship at 10:30, and we're back on our regular schedule. Remember the lady I announced this morning, Norma Ann Summerford. She's formerly of Red Bay, and she's in the hospital in Hamilton and has brain cancer and is waiting on to be going to hospice, and she'll go as soon as a bed is available for her. So let's remember this family. And I got a phone call this afternoon. We all know Ben Quinn. Old Jolly Ben. He was a fine young man, grew up here in this congregation, the son of Neil and Donna. He's got kidney issues. He's having kidney failure, and they put him on dialysis and having trouble with the dialysis because his blood pressure was very low. So let's remember Ben Quinn in our prayers and his family at this time. In our service tonight, Brother Alan Nichols will be leading the singing. Brother Ralph Duran will have the opening prayer, and Brother Jim Bryant will have the closing prayer. Song number 251. Absent-minded Savior, citizen.
251. Come we that love the Lord, and let our joys be known. Join in a song with sweet accord. Join in a song with sweet accord. And thus around the throne, and thus around the throne. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. Then let our songs abound, and every tear be dry. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground to fairer worlds on high, to fairer worlds on high. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. Number 304. This will be our song before prayer. 304. There's a beautiful place called heaven. It is hidden above the bright blue, where the good who from earth ties are riven, live in love and eternity through. Above the bright blue, the beautiful blue, Jesus is waiting for me and for you. Heaven is there, not far from our side, beautiful city of light. We know not when he shall call us, whether soon the glad summons shall be. But we know when we pass o'er the river, the glory of Jesus we'll see. Above the bright blue, the beautiful blue, Jesus is waiting for me and for you. Heaven is there, not far from our side, beautiful city of light. Those who would like to may stand as we sing this song. 156, 156. Only in Thee, O Savior mine, dwelleth my soul in peace divine, peace that the world, though all combine, never can take from me. Pleasures of earth so seemingly sweet, fail at the last my longings to meet. Only in Thee my bliss is complete. Only, dear Lord, in Thee. Only in Thee, dear Savior slain, losing Thy life, my own to gain. Trusting I'm cleansed from every stain, Thou art my only plea. Only in Thee my heart will delight, till in that land where cometh no night, faith will be lost in heavenly sight. Only, dear Lord, in Thee. Please be seated. Our invitation song will be number 216. 216.
We appreciate you being with us this afternoon. As we discussed in the 40 moment ago, it's been a long time, and I know I'm tired. I've not preached this much on a single day since mid-July, I guess it was, of last year. So I'm tired, and I probably know that you're tired as well. But I want to begin a study this evening of a very important topic. Genesis 1 and verse 1 simply begins, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Daniel 2 verse 28, Daniel said, "There is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets." In Hebrews chapter 1, beginning in verse 1, God who at sundry times and in diverse manners. Through the years, many people and some organizations have tried their very best to dethrone God from His throne. And that list, as I said, includes some organizations, it includes some individuals. One such organization is the Advancement the Association for the Advancement of Atheism. They have done their best to dethrone God. Secular humanists have sought to dethrone God. Voltaire and Huxley and Matson and Flew, a lot of people through all these years have sought to dethrone God. It wasn't all that long ago that the statistics said only 1% of Americans deny God's existence. That was probably about 25 years ago. The latest statistic in America today says that 4% of Americans deny the existence of God. Now, I'm not a math genius, but 382 million Americans, population somewhere thereabout, 4% of those deny God. I guess that'd be somewhere about 15 million people deny the existence of God. Many, many years ago, a prominent man out in Kansas City, he defied God before a large audience. He stood before the audience and said, I will give God 15 minutes to strike me dead. If he doesn't, there is no God. And he placed his watch on the podium, and the audience, it said, waited in breathless excitement to see what was going to happen. And when nothing happened, he then proclaimed, see, I told you, God does not exist. The audience applauded. A national newspaper read in the headline, the man had proved that God did not exist. A certain man wrote a rebuttal to the atheist ploy, and he used the idea of a colony of ants in New Mexico. And he said this colony of ants has defied the existence of the Santa Fe Railroad. An intelligent ant accurately described the system. He named the president. An unbelieving ant denied it all and defied the president. And he said, why don't the president of the line come out to Chicago and step on him if he actually exists? And he reached the same conclusion as did the atheist in Kansas City. He said, can't you imagine the busy president of the Santa Fe Railroad, with the destinies of that great concern in his hands, closing his desk and suspending his business to dash out to New Mexico to step on one tiny red ant, just to prove that he did in fact exist? My friends, why would God leave his business in heaven to take care of one person who denied his existence? That simply is not the way God operates. The question I ask is simply this: is there a God in heaven? And is there a supernatural God? And are we able to know him? You know, if God does exist, then it is supremely important that man believe in him. If he does not exist, then nothing matters. If God does not exist, nothing is right, nor is it wrong. If God does not exist, there's no life beyond this world. An atheist who denies God, he builds all of his hopes and life on a material foundation. And when death comes, that particular individual thinks it all is over. But if God does in fact exist, then that man has left this world unprepared to meet God. The Bible says in the book of Psalms, especially Psalm 91, Psalm 9, verse 17, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and the nations that forget God. Psalm 10, verse 4, the wicked, though the pride of his countenance will not seek after God, God is not in all his thoughts. And then Psalm 14, verse 1, the fool said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. And friend, the Bible from the New Testament that one day we must all appear before the judgment seat of God. Many men, many nations have lived as if there was no God in heaven. You think about the man Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was one who boasted that he himself built his empire by himself, his own accomplishment. But you know what? His kingdom perished. Alexander conquered the world, it said. He built his vast empire on culture and knowledge and philosophy. But you know what happened to that culture he established? It perished simply because there had no place in it for God. Rome was founded on the science of law and mind and jurisprudence. But because it defied and denied God, it also perished. Now, it's obvious that God is not presenting himself to man in our age as he did to patriarchs and inspired prophets of the long ago. And because that is the case, then the question about God must be decided on other evidence. And we can prove the existence of God by proving, first of all, that the Bible is inspired of God. We can prove the existence of God by showing evidence of him in this universe. And his existence can be proved by logical arguments which demand a supernatural God. My friend, there are many ways in which we affirm and can prove that there is indeed a God, a supernatural God. But now God's existence cannot be proven by the physical eye. You can't see him. The story is told of an infidel this infidel confused a group of young men. He demanded that if God existed, they must show God to him. He said, I will not believe there's a God unless I can see and hear and taste and smell and touch God. And if you cannot produce that evidence, then I will not believe there is a God. An old preacher spoke up and said, Sir, I perceive that you are an idiot. The infidel was shocked. He asked the man what an idiot was, and the preacher said, a man without a mind. The preacher demanded that the infidel show him his mind. He said, I will not believe you have a mind unless I can see it, hear it, taste it, smell it, and feel it. Later, the infidel became a believer in God as a result of that exchange. There are many things we cannot measure by the senses, but we know they exist. We know they exist because of strong evidence. Do you know that there is an emotion known as love that exists? Have you ever touched it, felt it, smelled it? Sorrow. What about air? Have you ever touched air? Have you ever touched electricity? Now, sometimes it might have touched me in an unforeseen way. We just don't reach out the air and touch electricity, though, but we understand it does indeed exist. So I tonight want to begin by giving you some general arguments for the existence of God. First of all is this. In all ages, in all civilizations, man has always had a belief in a supernatural God and has conducted some kind of religious activity. You go back and look through history, you will find in every age and every civilization, man has always thought that there was a higher being than himself. And not only that, but in those civilizations, they have offered some type of religion, some type of worship to that being. Now, why has man maintained a belief in a divine being? Where did the instinct that man has to worship originate? Friend, atheism cannot explain why mankind in every place, in every age has had religious beliefs and practices. It is more reasonable to say that God revealed himself to man in the beginning, and that man, ever since that revealing of God to man, man has retained an innate desire within us to know and honor our Creator ever since then. That's the most logical way to explain that. You say, well, then how do we account for all the myriads of God's other religions throughout this world? Why is there so many false religions in this world? I preached a series of lessons before this pandemic hit back in last March. We talked about, in order to have a counterfeit something, there has to be a true something. I've never heard, read, saw of a counterfeit $9 bill. They just don't exist. Why? Because there is no real thing. All of these counterfeits are based upon the fact that there is indeed a real thing. Whether it's the American Indians who believe in that Great Spirit, the Aborigines of Australia and their belief in a supreme being, go back to ancient Greece and Babylon and Rome, and all of those places held a belief in some super being. And the evidence points to belief in one supreme being in the most ancient of history. And those facts are in the Bible as well. The second way I want to talk about is this one. There is an argument for the existence of God known as the aesthetics argument. You don't hear about it all that much, but I think it's something to us to consider. Now, aesthetics is defined by pertaining to a sense of the beautiful, having a sense of the beautiful, or characterized by a love of beauty. Do you think man has a built-in appreciation of things that look or sound beautiful? You know, I went down to Florida last week. I got into the ocean to my knees one time. Most of the time I spent on the patio deck or on the beach itself looking out at the water. At night we opened the sliding doors to listen to the waves crash. Why would I do that? Where did man obtain the ability to recognize and love beautiful things and beautiful sounds? Have you ever noticed a goat before eating some beautiful row of flowers? Did the goat stop and really appreciate the beauty of those flowers? No. He simply ate them. Have you ever seen a cow out in the pasture standing and just gazing at a beautiful sunset? Have you ever seen a chimpanzee take a bouquet of roses and decorate their nest with it? A bear does not hang a beautiful painting in his den when he hibernates, does he? Friend, man has that ability. Man has the ability to feel joy, to feel emotion, to enjoy the beauty of what God created. Now let me ask you something. How did man get that ability? If, as we are told by learned people, if man evolved through a myriad of time, where did that ability come from? No other being in all the world has that ability. But man does. You do. I do. Friend, it's reasonable to me to say that it came from God. God put that in me. And He put it in you. there's also a law known as a moral law. The moral law within argument for the existence of God. You know, if atheistic concept of things is the proper way, then there is nothing essentially right or wrong. If atheism is true, if there is no God, it'd be just as proper and good and sound to kill a human being as to kill a poisonous snake, if atheism is true. It would be just as proper, if atheism is true, for a man to have many, many, many wives as it's right for a stallion to have a herd of mares. And to steal from someone else. You know, do you think in the animal world sometimes animals steal from other animals? Well, if atheism is true, then nothing is wrong. It's just as proper to steal from Jim as it is from an animal to steal from another animal. There will be no absolutes. There's no eternal punishment. There's no reward for good. There's no punishment for evil. But you know, in every man's heart, there is a sense of right or wrong. Now, that sense of right or wrong is not a part of the lower creation. Now, why is it that man alone has that ability? And if God did not give that to man, then where did it come from? The word ought in every language carries the idea of moral duty. Every society, even primitive ones, they all had a sense of what was right and wrong. Every society has been repulsed by certain things which violate that standard of being right or wrong. And that sense of right and wrong, followed by individuals and societies, often vary from the other. But though the standards differ, there are standards of what is right and what is wrong. But of all creation, man is the only creature with a moral law impressed on his being. No animal has it. If a man gets in the way of a kicking mule, and the mule kicks the man in the head and the man dies, do we take the mule and put him on trial and find him guilty and then sentence him to death and carry out that death penalty on that mule? But you know, it's entirely different if a man delivers that death blow to another man, isn't it? Why the difference? Because we understand that man is governed by a sense of right and wrong. Beasts do not have that sense of right or wrong. I ask you again, where did that sense come from? If both man and beast came from the same cell stock, as it were, then why did this moral law attach itself to one and not the other? And then there is the cosmological argument for the existence of God. The cosmos is the universe with its galaxies and stars and planets and moons. And the argument states that the cosmos is an effect produced by a primal cause. Now, no one can deny that the cosmos is here. But from where did it originate? Now, you know, for every effect there must be a cause. And so the question has to be answered, what caused the universe? The world is here. It is an orderly world. Such a world as we live in could not have begun by chance. And so what or who caused it? That's the question. If you were shipwrecked on an uncharted island and you got out and set foot upon the sand of the island and you saw human footprints there, what would you conclude? You would conclude that there were human beings on that island somewhere. Now, what would you conclude if you found a building on that island but did not find any people on the entire island? What would you conclude? You would conclude that at one time there were people on that island, because every effect, that is the building, must have a cause. Albert Einstein said, "I see at the beginning of the cosmic road not eternal energy or matter, but Lord God Almighty." Psalm 19 verse 1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." Hebrews 3 verse 4, "For every house is built by some man, but he that built all things is God." Friend, the cosmos came from God. There's also the teleological argument for the existence of God. That word teleological means purpose, design, adaptation of the universe. Friend, there are all kinds of evidences that we have not come here by chance or accident. Suppose you had 10 coins, same size. You name the first coin 1, the second coin 2, 3, and so forth and so on. You got to 10. And you dropped all the coins in a bag, and you shuffled the coins up. What is your chances of removing those coins in order? You reach in and pull 1 out, 2 out, 3 out, 4 out, till you get to 10. Your chance would be 1 in 10 billion to do that. Now, friend, if that simple experiment is almost beyond possibility, think for a moment about how impossible it would be for life, the earth, and the universe to just all happen by chance. The earth rotates on its axis at a rate of 1,000 miles an hour. Remarkable, isn't it? 1,000 miles per hour. If you reduce that speed to 200 miles an hour, the daylight periods would be so long that the heat from the sun would burn up all vegetable and animal life. And the nights would be so cold it would freeze everything. But the earth is just the right distance from the sun. If you move the earth closer to the sun, you get too much heat. Further away, what happens? Too much cold, too little light. If the land masses of the northern hemisphere were to exchange places with the waters of the southern hemisphere. Now, you saw the globe. What if the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere, what if they just changed places? What if the water went up north and the land mass came down south? You know what would happen? You'd have too little heat or too little cold. You see, even when God made it, God put the water in its proper places. And when the great flood of humanity came upon this earth, when the waters abated, guess where the waters were? Still in their right places where God designed them to be. You can't change anything. And somebody's going to try to tell me that I'm foolish or ignorant or unlearned because I believe that we did not get here by chance or accident. I believe there's a supernatural God who created this world. The fool said in his heart, there is no God. Friend, there can be no debate about where we came from, where our universe, this cosmos, came from. What about the human body? Remember in Psalm 139, verse 14, the psalmist said, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, he said. Do you think that the space shuttle has a highly complex communication system, a propulsion system, and guidance systems? And all of those are controlled by highly sophisticated computers. We understand that. Friend, your body has a nervous system greater than anything the world has ever known. A brain can design and build a computer, but there's not a computer in the world that can build a brain. A watermelon seed weighs 1/4,000th of a pound. 1/4,000th of a pound. But in that seed is a germ of life. And that germ of life in that small watermelon seed cannot be produced in any laboratory. And you plant that seed in the soil, and the soil itself has no life. The soil itself can give no life. But you plant that seed in the dirt, the seed sprouts, a vine is produced, and then melons are produced, and then thousands and thousands of more seeds are produced. And the melon it produces is about 500,000 times heavier than the seed that produced it. Isn't that amazing? An elephant weighs several tons. An elephant is powerful enough to pull its own weight. The elephant weighs 2 pounds. Guess how 2 tons? Guess how many tons he can pull? 2 tons. But you put one small bullet in the brain of that elephant, and that elephant turns into what? Inanimate matter. It still has the same weight. The chemical analysis has not changed. The muscles have the same strength, but the power of that elephant is gone. You know why? Because life is gone. See, friend, life is something that scientists simply cannot explain. They cannot create it. They can't even create life in its most simplest form. And mathematically, it is impossible for life to have began by chance. It's too complex. And so logically, you tell me, where did life come from if it did not come from God? I found this one was a little bit, never really thought about this next one I'm going to give you. In Job 38, beginning in verse 29, Job said, out of whose womb came the ice and the hoary frost of heaven? Who had gendered it? The waters are hid with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. As I began to study, it dawned on me that ice has a very unusual conduct. You know, generally speaking, when you heat an object, that object expands. And when you cool an object, it contracts. In the body shop, you used to get some hail damage on cars. We'd heat the metal up and then have ice water beside us and cool the metal back off very rapidly, and you could hear the dents popping out, pop, 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 because the metal would expand, then it would contract. But you know, You heat water, and it expands. But when chilled, it contracts to a certain point. When it nears the freezing point, the contraction of that water suddenly ceases. And when it nears the freezing point again, it begins to expand, and then soon it'll go back to what? Now suppose for a moment that the ice did not have those characteristics. What would happen if the streams and lakes were to freeze and ice did not have that ability to do that? When a body of water would freeze, the ice would go to where? It would sink to the bottom. And if the ice sunk to the bottom, what would happen to all of the sea life, all the fish life? The oxygen would be gone, and so they would what? They would die. But ice floats on top, and it leaves space for the fish and other creatures to have oxygen beneath it where they can keep on living. Now, how in the world did that ever happen? I mean, just by chance. It just so happened that of all the things in all this world, when you get to a certain point, a certain temperature, the ice ceases to contract any further. That's the end of it. Then you heat it back up to that certain point again, and then it expands once again. Why does water have those abilities? Friend, God made it that way. God made it that way. Boy, I pity a person who would ever think about that God does not exist. You explain all of this to me. It's going to take a lot of explaining to understand and tell me how all these things happen, and I just got started in that. You know, the salmon, that fish spends years at sea. But finally, it returns to the stream, and most of the time the very place where it had been hatched. And if you take that and put it in another stream, it's going to swim back, and it's going to find the same tributary out of which it came, and guess where it's going to go? It's going to go back home. It's going to spawn and die. Friend, how could a mere fish do what most humans cannot do? Find a particular place in a stream after they have been away from it for years and years at a time, and go right back and find that very place from which it came. I'll give you one more and I'm going to quit tonight. I found this one from Georgia. I thought it was interesting. In the pine forest of South Georgia, there's a type of flower known as a prison flower. It's also referred to as the jack in the pulpit. The jack in the pulpit flower. And it has male and female clusters inside the pulpit. And the pulpit has a very narrow constriction about halfway down the stem. Now, in order to be pollinated, a very little fly must find its way down through that constriction where it is trapped. And as it flies around inside, it dusts itself with the pollen. And after the fly is dusted with pollen, it doesn't take long till the inside of that flower begins to be very rough. So rough that the fly can climb out of the flower now. It then contacts the female cluster where pollination occurs. The male cluster allows the fly to escape. Now the female may or may not escape. My friend, how in the world did anybody ever design that? You know how? A divine designer. Divine designer. I hope that I'm impressing you with the verses and the depth of them where it says, the fool said in his heart there is no God. The heavens declare the glory of God. The earth, his firmament, the firmament showeth his handiwork. My friend, there is indeed a God. He's a supernatural being. And we need to talk about these things. You know what's going to happen? Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, they're going to leave the home one day. They're going to get into these universities. They're going to be bombarded with people who're supposed to be smart, who are just plumb ignorant. So ignorant that they're going to deny that God exists. Now, friend, it's bad to be that ignorant, to deny that God does not exist. Friend, there's no way that this world could be like it is, and all things work as they do without a designer. And I'm going to prove that to you in the weeks to come. There is a God. And as I began this lesson, if there is a God, then it requires certain things of us. That's why it's so easy to say, well, there is no God, because by saying that, I remove myself of all accountability. But if there is a God, and there is a God, then that means that I am accountable for certain things. And I'm going to have to meet that very same God in judgment. So I want to live my life in a ready, prepared sense. And I'm going to have to affirm and uphold the belief that God is supernatural, that God created. And when it's all said and done, it makes a lot more sense than to say this world began by chance. I hope my aim is to strengthen our faith. There's no reason to doubt God, because he does exist. Look out at the world. I don't know how many hours I sat and watched wave after wave and thought, how could anybody think that all this happened just by chance? Just by chance. All that water. You know, while I was going on vacation, I saw many reports of flooding in this part of the country up here. Roads washed out. Flooding going on like wild. But you know what? On the shore of the ocean of the Gulf of Mexico, I never was concerned I was going to drown in my in the condominium we were staying in. Isn't that something? Lakes and rivers, Smith Lake Dam. In years past, I have fished in Smith Lake out of people's flower beds. It'd be so high. Underwater right now is the pavilion at the dam where you launch your boat. All you see is at the top of the shed. Light poles that much out of the water. You know why? Because it raises and it lowers. But God, apparently, and I know he did, God told the ocean to stay where? Stay right where you are. It's amazing to me. Amazing to me. God did that. And don't ever try to teach me or my children that it happened by chance. I don't think we're that foolish. I hope we're not that foolish. Well, I hope that you have been strengthened this evening in your faith. We've not preached a sermon about the basics of Christianity. It's important to be a Christian. Important to be a part of the kingdom, because as I discussed this morning, if you're not in that kingdom, you'll be left out, because the kingdom is going to give back to God. So you've got to be in the kingdom. And the only way to be in the kingdom is to be baptized into that kingdom. Your sins are washed away, and at that same time, you are placed in that kingdom. And if you've not done that, we can assist you this very evening. And if you realize you wandered away from God, we want you to come back home. Examine your soul's condition. If you're in need, we'd be glad to assist you. If it's public, do it in a public manner. If it's private, do it in a private manner. And let's all acknowledge and affirm that there is a God in heaven, and live our lives in a prepared state to meet him in that judgment and finally be ushered into the portals of heaven. Can we assist you? So then please come. So all stand and sing.
There's a land that is fairer than day, and the faith we can see afar. For the Father makes over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore by and by. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful